There's also a link on our art news site that describes the biography as well as the research that all of our guests are doing. So if you want to get a little bit of heads up or read about their work either prior to or after their seminar. Are we ready to go now? What's happening right now is that some of these seminars, Johannes is sending them to DapTV so that they are being transmitted to the video stream. And that's what is trying to sort out whether the spotlight is the right time. And I think we
Yeah.
so welcome and thank you, Fiona.
We still have not completed the film sound check of Fiona TV. Graham, can you give us a report?
Wait. I just stopped it. It's running.
Thanks, Gretchen. Just so that you know what we're doing is it's an experiment in not only transmitting these lectures to the world and whoever is interested. So Fiona agreed to being broadcast. So we are going live onto the DapTV, and while we will also record a document. So the lecture will also be preserved and will be available online whenever someone would like to listen to Fiona. And often these lectures and other performances are run in a monthly circuit. So what we haven't yet heard is the sound on Fiona's film. Yes.
Something is playing.
Yeah. So the DVD is playing and her sound levels are up, but we're not hearing it through the house. And the sound is important for your documentation.
Yeah. Okay, good, good. Okay.
Okay, we can stop that, and then later on, when you present your work, you want to go full screen.
Okay.
So view full screen. So that ends my contribution. Now at the end, Gretchen, we'll have question and answer, yeah? Absolutely. And that again is live, so that sometimes there are also questions coming in from the online viewers. So we welcome our online viewers and Fiona Templeton, your face.
Okay, hello. Thanks for coming. And those of you who've already been listening to me for a couple of hours today, thanks for coming back for more. As I say, this will not reiterate some of that material, although you might be able to make connections later, but I'm trying to go in another direction. What I want to talk about now is the place of language in my work. And to some extent, I'm going to talk about writing, but mostly I'm not going to talk about writing, because for me, language and writing are not necessarily the same thing. I want to begin with talking about a piece of work which gave rise unexpectedly to a certain train of thought. That piece of work was written, this one was written, over a period of 6 weeks, each day in an abandoned prison. And each day I would go in and write on a continuous strip of paper. I would install it in a cell and write on that piece of paper all the way out of the cell and along to the next one. So the journey of the writing took me from the way into that cell block all the way down one end, around and up the other end, back out the door that I came in. The sort of formal aspect of it, the day after day, was a reflection of the context, which was the prison, because it was also a collaboration with Amnesty International, who provided information in each cell. There was information about a current prisoner of conscience somewhere in the world. The writing wasn't necessarily about that prisoner of conscience, because one of the things that I didn't want to do with this was memorialize an individual. What I wanted to do was to make those installations, active installations, which people, I don't know if you know how Amnesty works, basically they encourage people to write letters of petition to various governmental bodies on behalf of prisoners of conscience. Petitioning for release, usually petitioning for being treated well and so on, depending on the circumstances. And some of the cases are quite harrowing and extreme, and some people are released through this and some of them never are, but at least they know that letters keep coming. So that repetitiveness of the dailiness of being in a prison, I wanted to kind of enact through making the work, and not just putting something there, but actually having to carry out a task that required me to be there each day. I didn't stay there overnight. I began at the beginning thinking about going in, and I had been doing a lot of research and I'd be reading the cases. So the writing is really about the inhumanity of enclosure, of forced enclosure. And that this is something that humans do to other humans. And reflecting on that in relation to the body. I won't talk a lot about this piece because I want to go into a different kind of writing, but one of the things that I discovered through the writing of this piece was, so I started at the beginning. As I said, I was writing on, it was actually the one thing I could find to write on that would be long paper was something that's used in the garment industry, some interfacing, which comes in big rolls. And when I ran out of one, I would stitch another one onto it. But, so I was writing on this thing, which was looked a bit like toilet paper, but it was tougher. And started thinking, I might have some ideas about things I wanted to say that day, but some days I didn't. And keeping going with this task of completing a cell per day. And one thing that I was going to say that I discovered in the writing of this is that the linearity of that task, even although at certain points you would see writing on two sides of a cell door, so you could make connections, that the linearity required of me a certain kind of physical continuation, which the audience would have to reflect in order to read it. They'd have to put that movement into their body too, and sometimes it went up to the ceiling and down on the ground and was woven in things. But also that linearity gave rise to a certain kind of amnesia in the writing. If you're writing on a piece of paper and it goes back and forth like that, and then you've got another piece of paper just next to it, you can check, you can flip pages. I found that with that writing, I sort of didn't know where I'd been. I was always in the moment of a thought. And the kinds of ways of thinking that I had to develop for myself to structure this or to give coherence or continuation, where I realized kind of like the patterning that you get in old oral poetry. So repetition. In cultures where even literature is kind of the wrong word, but because that's about the letter, where words are oral, patterning evolves to evoke certain kinds of memory so that you know where you've been, and to remind you of the structure and to remind you of what's happening and to project where things are going. So I became more and more interested in that non-linear thinking about writing, which ironically had emerged from this very linear physical structure. So a while later, I'd been working on one piece and somehow it wasn't going very well. I was just kind of stuck in it, and had been doing lots of reading about something else, and one day just went in and said, I don't care how long I've spent on this, it's gone. I'm going to do what I feel like doing. And I started to work on this material about the figure of Medea. One of the reasons that I was very interested in this figure is it's kind of the worst woman. And I was very interested in where this worst woman figure comes from, and what it is about her that's so fearful, so frightening rather, that makes people so fearful. But at the same time, I felt that I had done all this reading, and I really wanted to work on this one too, and I thought, where do I start? I know all this stuff, and the last thing I feel like doing is sitting down like this again, or like that. And I'd been reading a book by Carl Jung, apart from all the Medea material, and called, it's gone, On the Feminine, and which was related to this, because I thought, what is it? What is some thinking about this essential woman? One of the things that he talks about in that is a case where he is analyzing a woman, and she has dreams where she meets certain figures and she doesn't know what to make of them. And they talk about these figures, and they're kind of at a stalemate in putting a meaning to the figures. So he suggests that she talk to them. So I thought, well, that's what I need to do. I need to talk to this material. So I basically took a tape recorder and didn't immediately address the material, but just started thinking, what's coming out of just talking? And I didn't want it to be completely random associative, because I thought that could go on forever, although some of that technique comes up at a certain point. But I first started to describe, just close my eyes and describe to myself what I could see. So it was a way of, in a way, dreaming, except it's more like hypnagogic imagery, which is the imagery you see kind of when you're falling asleep, just when you close your eyes and relax. So I started describing that, and some of it was disconnected and some of it was unrelated. And some very clear figures emerged, some very funny things emerged, but I just kept describing it. And then some of it was abstract, like light and so on. So that was an interesting exercise. But then after a couple of days of doing this, I started not only to see images, but to see words, partly because I'd been looking at books all day. So little fragments, sometimes not complete words, so I would say them. So even although this was, in a way, just reactive, I felt that all this information was in there and was coming out through this process. Then the next step in that process was that not only did I start to see fragments of words coming up in front of my eyes, but I started to, I don't know if I was hearing them, but they came sort of as phrases, not necessarily visual. And sometimes I had no idea what they meant or why they were there, and I would just say them. So in a way, the tapes are kind of a very huge collection in the end of material. And so that was the first 3 or 4 days of making those steps. And then I took the step, thinking back about this Jung case description, of starting to interrogate what was coming. So rather than just let it all be completely coming from my subconscious, I tried to have a dialogue with it from a more conscious point of view, like, what do you mean? And gradually what started to happen in that dialogue, which is going back and forth, in the transcripts between my questioning and this more arising from the subconscious material is that you start not to be able to tell the difference between the voices, because both of them are a mixture of both. And then gradually, there might be more than one voice, because it's just, after all, me. And so that dialogue started to be created. And so I kept going. I spent a whole summer on this process and put it aside for a while. And it wasn't actually till the following year, when I had some time to work on writing, although there was no writing involved, that somehow the voice for this piece, or the tone and exactly how it was going to focus, came out. And actually, sometimes I would know what the scene was before I would start talking, and it was very focused. And sometimes later I constructed the scenes out of the fragments that came through this process. I'm just going to read a little bit from an article that was published in Sensualities, Textualities, which was edited by Sue Broadhurst and Joe Machin. And the article's called Speaking for Performance, Writing with the Voice. Speech is not writing by the body. Writing is signs of speech. In other words, speech comes first. Orpheus's decapitated head, torn from his body by the female followers of the cult of Dionysus, the dark, the senses, life and death, was the book. Follower of Apollo, this is Orpheus, the light, the eye, the mind, the techne of his thought could remain after him, speaking as it rolled. In being separated from his body, it became the made thing, the defiance of death. It is the memory of speech, or the forecast of its possibility. Speech that imitates writing is papery. So Orpheus's rolling head is thought of as the first book, because it was dead. It was still speaking and it was dead.